What brought you to America? Why move your family across the world?
The Lord. I always get that question just randomly out and about in the store or, any kind of business situation. And they'll be like, so why did you move? And I'm always like, do I say the Lord? Which most times I do, depending on how much time I have to expound on our call. But yeah, honestly, my husband and I just felt this innate call. I think you're supposed to go to America. And it took about 2 years of that kind of swirling around on the inside of us.
What were you doing at the time in
So
Australia?
we were both working on staff full-time at a church in Australia. Okay. Like we'd helped pioneer. It had been part of a movement for a very long time since I think my first ministry job was 1994.
Okay.
So 95, actually. 94 I was at Bible college. 95. And so it was around 2008, 2009 that my husband just felt this stirring. Like, I think we're supposed to move to America. And I'm like, well, you can move to America. I ain't moving to America. But we began to pray into it, and we just asked the Lord to confirm it. And so it was about a 2-year process of just asking the Lord, like, why? What are we going there for? Like, why is this draw to go to America? But it was bizarre because we had so many confirmations through prophetic words or people who didn't know us and just, I can see you doing this, or have you ever thought of this? And it was kind of those little flags along the way, but it wasn't until we talked to our pastors, and we'd been with them for, nearly 2 decades. And we were like, we just feel a stirring, and I think we're supposed to move abroad. And they're like, well, let's ask the Lord. And if it's meant to be, let's put a little kind of confirmation piece out, and why don't you apply for the green card lottery, which most Americans don't know what that is.
Yeah.
If you're a foreigner,
Yep.
you are very well acquainted with it.
Yeah.
And we were like, oh, no one ever gets residency through the lottery because it's like millions of people apply and there's only 50,000 that they give worldwide. But they were like, that's kind of God's confirmation then. And so that wasn't until, we told them in June, didn't apply till October, and didn't find out till the following May. So you can imagine that whole season of, okay, Lord, what is going on? They give me a promotion to executive pastor thinking they're never going to get it.
Sure.
And we're like, no problems, because we're thinking if it's the Lord, okay, let that be the sign. And it rolled around to May that next year, and we didn't get it. We didn't get the application process approved. And I was like, oh, that's really weird, because we'd had so many prophetic words. We started to feel this kind of separating, and it was like something feels like it's moving. And so my husband was actually in Germany on tour with the band and the team. And he's like, I got this random email from the US State Department saying that they've made an error with the lottery and they're going to redraw in July. Do you think it's legit? So I do my research and I'm like, oh yeah, love, there was a computer glitch and it only took a certain number, so it wasn't a fair draw. So they're redrawing it in July, which means everyone gets back into the pool.
Wow.
And it will be determined in July. And July rolls around and they were like, you've been successful for the lottery. And so we went back to our pastors and we're like, we're going. And they're like, well, that has to be the Lord, because you got a no and then a yes. It was a redraw. And so we ended up moving in April of 2012, not knowing what on earth we were doing. So a lot of people now think we came to America to start a church, but we actually didn't. Henry's always been involved in worship and music and production and at sound engineering, all that jazz. So he was able to work anywhere. We could have moved to anywhere and he could have worked. So America just felt right. Nashville felt right because he'd always worked with bands and things like that. And so we kind of just landed in Nashville, but I hated it. And I was like,
why?
It was just so foreign. It was probably the greatest culture shock for me, because even though we spoke the same language, the mindset and the cultural differences are literally like East and West.
Yeah.
And I wasn't prepared for that. So I was like, I don't understand. Nothing feels familiar. Everything feels different. And yet when you go on a holiday, you think, oh, this is where, everything's the same. But when you're living amongst it all, you realize all the nuances that you're so familiar with and used to. So I did not like Nashville. And Nashville 11 years ago is not the Nashville that everyone's
Yeah.
moving to Nashville
Yeah, all the
now
people
because
are.
we have actually prayed over the city and brought revival.
People should thank you for it.
Thank
Yes.
you. You're
Yeah.
welcome.
Yeah.
You're welcome because the promised land is here and now. But no, I'm only joking for those of you who probably think I'm serious. But you know, it wasn't great. It was dry. Spiritually, it was very barren. It was difficult. It was very religious, had a huge religious spirit over it. And I just didn't want to be there. So I was like, can we move to LA, New York, somewhere where there's non-Christians? It felt very Christian, but not alive,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. Like everyone's a Southern cultural Christian,
Right.
but not a born-again disciple. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And so that's why it was really hard for me. But Henry started working with a lot of the artists and musicians and whoever at the time, and we were noticing a trend. We were noticing that nobody went to church on Sundays because they were mostly touring, but also there was nothing to go to that was bringing them life. And so, but we're watching their lives kind of unravel, and we're like, hold on a minute, no one's discipling these musicians, artists, and whoever. Maybe we should just open up our home. And so that's kind of how church began. It was an accidental discipleship program, if you like, that turned into a church.
That's awesome.